What's up, everybody? I am Baron Baptiste, and this is the show for disrupting the drift, disrupting the conspiracy for mediocrity in modern humanity. I'm here with my friend David Masters. David, welcome.
Thank you. Always great to be here with you, Baron.
Yes, it is. It's always good, man. I always leave our conversations elevated and, like I touch something in myself, or better said, these conversations touch something in me that I really don't find anywhere else. It's something of the heart, something of the soul. So for me to be here, so I'm grateful for it. Everybody, please share the show. We ask that you share the show. It's how we grow the show, and it's growing. I mean, the downloads, each episode seem to be hitting some kind of nerve, some kind of pulse. So we appreciate that because that's how we appreciate you, because that growth here is happening through you, because of you sharing the show. So, David, you and I were speaking earlier about this kind of what would you call it? The hypnosis of life.
Yes.
Like how people are running on autopilot. They're on automatic pilot. They're not aware of that. They don't know that. And they don't know that they don't know that. It's completely out of their sphere of awareness. It's like living under a kind of spell, like waking up from a dream. We've all had that experience, waking up from a dream. And it's like, but when you first wake up, it's like, wait, was that right when you're coming out of the dream? You're beginning to wake up. You're like, wait, was I dreaming, or was that real? And then all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, wow, that was a dream. And wow, thank goodness I woke up from that dream, because that dream was somewhat of a nightmare, or it had a dark flavor, dark color quality to it. But that's what we're referring to here. I think a lot of people are just so depressed or frustrated, full of anxiety, fear, their anger. There's so much anger. The world is angry, and it's but all that's hypnotic, isn't it, David? Like, do you see that? Like, right? It's like people don't know that all of that reactive life is actually unconscious.
Yeah, that's true. And until somebody starts poking the hive. and so when stresses come along, that's poking the hive. When problems arise and, you're stressed out, that's poking the hive. And it's weird because a lot of people, the last time we talked, you had a person that was addicted to pressure. But you don't understand how much people need the poking of the hive to get the bees all stirred up, to get the energy going, because they don't realize that they're not living authentically. And this is, what we were saying is that I just did a piece on Pavlovian conditioning. And this goes back to the 1920s in the experiments with dogs. And what the scientist did was he got these dogs together, and then before they fed them, they rang a dinner bell. And after a while, the dogs expected to get fed, and they started salivating. Well, that was a conditioning that they figured out that if they can do it to dogs, they can do it to everybody, to people. And so much of our lives, we live in a sort of Pavlovian condition that we're not aware of, that we are, from the minute we come into this world, we are told what we can and cannot do. We're given our name and our identity, and we're given, our marching orders and our instructions on who we're supposed to be and who we're not supposed to be. The whole world that surrounds us is kind of a matrix that sort of tells us who we are and who we aren't and what we can and cannot do. And so most people don't realize that, as you said, they don't know that they don't know that they're living out this imposed life, this life that has been constructed and designed by others for them. And at a certain point, and the thing that I said, which I think is a bit controversial, but I believe it's true, is that most people don't have almost any original thoughts. And if you step back long enough, and if you are willing to consider what I just said, you might realize that most of what you think doesn't come from you at all. And I know that for myself, when I was very young, I had a thought, and the first thing that I thought was, where did that come from? what the heck? What's that doing there? And I realized that most of my thoughts were not really my own, if any of them, because I never was allowed to have my own thoughts. I was always told who I should be and not be. And so what I
Well,
said to you,
yeah,
and I'll just make this
yeah,
statement and get your thoughts,
yeah.
is that the most original thought you can have is that you don't have any original thoughts. And that's the
Right
beginning of
there,
the real you.
some freedom,
Yeah,
some real freedom, right
exactly
in
right.
there, huh?
Yeah, that's the
That's the
beginning of
beginning of
you.
the original you,
Yeah.
an original creative thought. Um, you know, it's interesting. A couple of things come to mind. Yeah, there's this like, I don't know if this is what Jung was talking about, but when the collective conscious consciousness, collective kind of thinking. But there's something about, we're born into a world of language, a world of narratives, and we take on these narratives. It's like, I think in the Bible, Jesus referred to it as the worm that never dieth.
Mm-hmm.
It is the past sins, past patterns and sins and like that are passed down generation to generation. But what I'm pointing to here is the narratives that are passed down. And then that not only from parents, but cultures, societies, general things you do, or the taboos, the things you don't do. Now, those narratives are adopted. That's what I hear you saying. In a sense, there's nothing original. There's not original thoughts. Well, okay, if we're not having original thoughts and we're adopting others' thoughts, well, those thoughts are narratives. They're stories, in a sense. And those stories become who we are. And something I learned in working with people at my boot camps and trainings, and we would do work around stories, how people live inside their story. They're the central character of their story. Everyone else around them and in their lives are just other actors on the stage of their life, but they're the central character in the center of their story. And then, but when you really look, you start doing some looking, like, well, wait, where did these stories come from? Like, did someone tell me this story and I bought into it? And it could even be the story, like, you're no good, and you're stupid, you're not going to amount to anything. Okay, you take that, I'm not wanted, you get whatever the story, but then it has some source. It's carried forward. It's carried down a line, not only from your own family, your parents, your mother, your father, but then the educational system, your teachers, how to be in school and how not to be. And you have to conform. You conform or you rebel is kind of what you're left with. And but somewhere in there you get lost. But I want to keep pointing to for a moment this idea of narratives that we adopt, narratives and stories we buy into, because I think the world right now, there's ideologies coming at us from many directions. You're on social media, you're on the mainstream news. There's just propaganda through advertising, whether it's big pharma or big food, or what the war machine wants you to know, what you should think. You should think. They feed you narratives, and because we've been trained at from the time we were born, like you were saying, to buy the story, adopt this. We're told what to believe. We're told what to think. We're not having original thoughts, but we take these stories and narratives on like they're our own. And that's the dangerous, right there. That's the dangerous place. But I'll say, I think, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, David, but I think that's also the point right there of hypnosis, where you not only do you adopt the stories or the narratives you're given, but there's a point in there where they become your own. And you become then right and righteous about these narratives, and you believe, oh yeah, this is my original thinking. I'm thinking for myself. but you, through your conditioning and programming, you don't realize, no, actually, you wouldn't be saying all this. You wouldn't be thinking all this. You wouldn't be so right about all this if you were actually an original thinker.
Well, I tell you, what you're describing. First of all, there's a movie that people need to watch. It's called The Truman Show.
Mm.
It is a very powerful spiritual metaphor of what we're talking about today. He was a person that had become owned by a corporation. And what they did with him was they decided to make his whole life like a soap opera. And so everywhere he went in his world, there was cameras in every single place, and everything was branded with a product. And this is how
Was that Jim Carrey?
it was Jim Carrey, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that movie. I don't
But
remember it actually, but I know the movie. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
it's
Yeah.
such a profound movie because he begins to wake up to realize that things aren't quite right, and that everybody, when he starts to wonder what's outside the walls of the world that he lives in, because it's a giant studio that he lives in, and everything is the same every day, and the people that he's around are people that are strangely familiar, and he doesn't know why. And he starts to wake up and he begins to realize that something is really off. And then when he starts to question what's off, this is when the pushback begins, because the company doesn't want him to
Mm-hmm.
realize that his whole life is a giant soap opera. So then everybody starts misdirecting him. And he looks at travel posters on the wall and he says, "Oh, I'd love to go there someday." "Oh, yeah, well, and then they take the travel posters down. And then the travel agency closes. And everything starts to collapse when he starts to ask about it, everything that he wants to know about. And you see, this is kind of a metaphor of our lives, is that we are living in a construct. Everybody's living in a construct. No, it's not just a giant, TV set, but in a way it
Mm-hmm.
is. And you were talking about narratives and how people are the center of their story. And it's true, but guess what? The story is still being composed. See, most people's lives are a story that is being composed by forces that they do not recognize. And what I said earlier about the original thought is the first time you see that none of this is you. That's when the real you begins to be born. And there's a scripture that says, "Don't be surprised when I say you must be born again." It's not like a rebirth of a person. You're not born literally, you're born spiritually. You begin a brand new life with a brand new sense of yourself and a brand new purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, no, it's very good. I want to keep kind of looking at this story piece that you're bringing up,
Yeah.
kind of deepening the conversation around, because yeah, you said something. You said, the story, it's evolving. Let's say the story it's active. It's not like fixed per se, but inside of your own story, you may be fixed. A part of your story may be, well, I can't change. It's too late. I'm resigned to, this is just how I am. This is how life is. It sucks. I'm depressed. None of it's going to, that may be part of the storyline. But this is what I want to say here. Consider that there is a story life and then there's a real life. We're inside of a story and we don't know it, and we don't know that we don't know it, and we're subject to that story, and how life shows up for us is seen through that story, and it gives us what to think, it gives us what to see, what to do, what to say, where to go, where not to go, what not to say, what not to do. There's no freedom in the story, not
Mm-hmm.
really.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's not real. But people, this is my experience in working with people over a lot of years, and around what we're talking about here, and is that people do not want to give up their stories. They will fight for their stories, even when, well, and especially when their stories are completely self-defeating, self-diminishing, when your stories are costing you actually everything you actually really want in life. They're costing you the deeper, bigger connection to your creator, your source, your creative power, your original thought and vision for life, and it's costing your vitality. but people won't give it up. They'll fight for their stories. And it took me a lot of years to realize why. I was very aware and present to, well, people are going to fight and argue for they'll defend their stories. And, but I also knew I would stand for people waking up, because what was on the other side of that story was freedom. What was on the other side of the story was real power and love and generosity of being and the innocence, the original self. And your true calling is on the other side of that story. So I would be in the trenches with people, willing to fight the good fight, to have people even resisting seeing their story, knowing they're defending it. And to me, it was like, okay, this is typical, ordinary, usual. Everyone's going to be defending their story out of the gates. Fine. And though I was committed to people having experience of, well, what's on the other side of the story? Because you can keep your story. I'd always say, look, that's there for you. You can always go back inside of it, but you know not what's on the other side of it. Why not just explore that and then choose? And I'll tell you, people would tip it once they got to the other side of the story, like, oh my gosh, thank you. Thank God. Like, I'm burying that story. Now I can author a new one. But from free choice. But here's my point. It took me a long time to realize why people fight for their stories. And this is what I got to, was that people fight for their stories because their stories tell them who they are. Mm-hmm. When they give up the story or lose the story, if they even just leaving or letting the story go is a threat. And the threat there is like, well, who am I without my story? I wouldn't know who I am. My story is made up of all my past and every decision I've ever made, every judgment, every, everything is like the story. It tells me who I am. And without that, well, I'm nobody or I'm nothing. That's very scary. I won't know who I am. But it brings us to that existential question of like, well, who am I? It takes some humility and maybe courage even to just really stand in not knowing who you are, but being in the inquiry of that. Like, who are you actually? Like, well, really?
That really brings up another important component of this, which is, and I think you mentioned this, that there are two lives, but one of the lives is who you are or who you've become, and the other life is who you are not. And so that's the hard part, because, the transition from who you think you are to discovering who you really are is really only, you're like a few realizations away from actually going through that door. But the hardest part of that is finding out who you aren't. And this is what you're explaining about why people defend their story, because they really believe that story. And they've put all of their energy in believing it and reinforcing it. And when it comes to coming to the conclusion that it's all been a big illusion, the illusion conclusion, if you could say that's where the pain, and this is where I love what you say about, it was Gabriel Gibran saying that the pain that you're feeling is the cracking of the egg.
Yeah, that encloses you, the shell that encloses you.
Yes, see, that's the pain that you have to go through. And you go back to this idea that, in the Bible, it says, don't be surprised when I say you have to be born again. But it's a born again consciousness. It's a truth birth, and the truth about yourself. And so what I call it personally, I call it the conscious process of elimination. So you begin by discovering one thing. It's the first thing that you see about yourself, whatever it may be. And what it does is it begins the domino effect of discovery. But you have to be willing to go through that discovery. If you're not willing to go there, I mean, I was watching a documentary on some of the most famous guitar players. I love good guitar. I mean, I think I'm a Jimi Hendrix fan from when I was 14 years old.
That's old school. OG.
It's old school.
OG.
But in my opinion, one of the greatest guitar players that ever lived. But when you see these famous guitar players now, some of them are passing away, and then they're doing retrospectives on their lives. Their whole life is nothing but standing in front of a concert. And that's all that they have for their life. What whatever their interpersonal relationships are. It's all based on them being these rock gods. And so how hard is it to give up that? Well, it's got to be nearly impossible, right? And so you look at somebody like Russell Brand. Now, Russell Brand went from being a movie star to a truth
Mm-hmm.
teller. And
Yeah.
he had this, they call it the red pill, where you take the red pill, you wake up in the real world. And so, see, there's got to be a moment of delineation where you realize and you're okay with knowing that's not who I am. And then the
Mm-hmm.
conscious process of elimination begins to extract you, like from being extracted from the matrix,
Yeah.
slowly but surely every day.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I see that, like a Russell Brand type person who was, Hollywood celebrity,
Terrible
Hollywood
drug addict, by the
actor.
way, abuser.
Well,
Of,
most of them are,
yeah, yeah.
I mean, not all, not all, but it's amazing. I mean, being in Hollywood for years and as like yoga teacher to a lot of stars, A-listers,
Mm-hmm.
certainly B-listers, and seeing the inside of that world, it's there's a lot of addiction, a lot of uh, narcissism, and the addiction to celebrity, to fame, and what that gets you. And it's to see someone like Russell Brand give that up. Now he's still in his full self-expression in the world, but now he's a storyteller, a truth teller,
Mm-hmm.
but he's got a higher purpose. Now, whether you agree with him or I don't agree with everything he says, but a lot of it, man, it's good stuff. But partly it's become what I find awakening about someone like him, without having to buy into everything he's saying. But it's because he's someone who's separating out truth from lies for himself in
Yes,
his own life.
there it is.
And
You said the quiet part out loud.
yeah,
Separating out
yeah.
truth from lies. That's
Yeah.
where it all begins.
Well, and that world is so seductive, right? So
Yeah.
even as a yoga teacher myself, like being okay, whatever you want to call it, a well-known global yoga teacher, instructor, built a global yoga brand. And so, and seeing like how people, and in that world, I used to do all these yoga conferences with, the big name yoga teachers, the biggest names. I was usually one of the biggest draws, easily hands down. And it was like, you can really get caught up in all that. But I saw early on, it was like something about it to me was like, well, these people, like, I appreciate the appreciation that people are giving back. Like, okay, these practices you've shared, these, concepts or principles, practices have changed my life in such an amazing, great ways. So that I appreciate. But then it crosses this line where people put you up on a pedestal. They see you in a certain kind of light, to me, that's unhealthy. And it's the guru complex too. It's like there's, and when I say guru complex, you can play the guru, but then it's also the followers that play into the guru complex or system or model,
Right.
whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And it was like early on, this background about me, but it was like early on, I was like, I don't want to be anybody's guru. I don't want to be anyone's leader. That's where I carved out my own kind of unique style of yoga, and I demystified it. I new aged it. I took out the new agey, a lot of the kind of mystical or new agey stuff that can go around yoga, and I extracted just the very practical, physical practices, breathing practices, principles for living that optimize your health, your well-being, your vitality, just health, in a holistic sense, mind, body, and health. And I appreciated those aspects. And so I designed it in a way that I wasn't the guru, the one with all the answers is what I want to say. I created a body of principles, a methodology that people then could use on their own for themselves. It wasn't dependent on a teacher. It could awaken the teacher in each and every person, and they could, from principles, they could learn on their own and have their own discover for themselves rather than giving them the answers and them living from my answers or anything like that. But my point in saying this is that there's something I had to discover that's like, no, I don't want that. But people do that anyhow. They put you on a pedestal anyhow, but people put you on a pedestal in part so that it is just automatic, but in part by what we're talking about here, it's hypnotic. They've been trained from an early age to look to just buy what's given externally. And if something can profoundly change their life, or for good or bad, it's people buy into narratives externally. And I think the conversation we're having here is to be able to distinguish for yourself and discover for yourself lies from truth, illusion from and falsity from reality, story, unreality from reality, story from fact or truth. So because I think otherwise we're walking around like we're just these automatic, we're being pulled like puppets almost, our strings, and we're an automatic pilot, and we're triggered all the time. We're taking everything personally because we're actually not there. A not you is there. Mm-hmm. And then you get elevated up and you're around people and friends who elevate you. But man, all it takes is one person to come along and cut you off at the knees, and then you're a pile of
what though?
Crap on the floor. Yeah.
I pondered this statement that Khalil Gibran made about the pain that you feel is the cracking of the shell that encloses you.
Yeah.
And because it's so profound that it takes a long time to come to the real meaning of it. And I discovered it just right now as we were talking. So I can share this with you in real time. The shell that encloses you is the ego that doesn't allow you to see that you're not who you think you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the shell that you have painted yourself inside of, and that everybody around you wants you to stay there because they also have a shell. And that shell has a consciousness that you could wake up. It's like a sentient shell, and it knows that if you just get one glimpse outside, if you just crack that shell for just one moment, you'll discover a whole new life that's just been waiting for you. And you will feel pain. So yes, embrace that pain. Just embrace it and let it sweep over you. Mm-hmm. And then realize that pain is pulling you out. That's it.
Yeah, very good. And I'll say this, I'll add this to it. So the pain that you feel is suffering, you could say. And I think you can suffer for no aim, without any aim or purpose in life. And I think you end up bitter, and you end up resentful, and it's a downward spiral. I think life, your dad said this to me actually years ago. He said, look, life is suffering, and you're going to suffer one way or the other. He said, you may as well suffer for virtue's sake, virtue's sake, and for the sake of being virtuous in life.
Yep.
And I never forgot that. It really stuck with me because, Buddha's first tenet is of noble truth. I think there are 4 noble truths for Buddha. Buddha's first noble truth is that life is suffering. Life is suffering. Mm-hmm. And but I think what I've come to learn is that life is suffering, and you need higher aim. You need to be connected to your calling in life, or what's calling you. You need to be up to something greater than yourself, something bigger than yourself, the identity self, something greater, something bigger, to have a higher aim. So then when you will inevitably be confronted by and with suffering, pain, but you're using that pain as a breaking of the shell that's enclosing you as you're expanding toward and into your higher calling, your higher aim in life. something greater than yourself. So you're shedding off the shell that encloses you, but you're growing up to and into something greater than the self that's enclosed in that shell. So, but I wanted to presence that point. You need higher aim. You need purpose. Yeah.
It's so profound.
Yeah.
But just always remember too, that with animals that are born in an egg, if they can't get through the egg, they can't live. They stop right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So breaking through the egg, it's the shell of the ego. The ego is not as powerful as you think it is. It only has the power that you give it. And the conscious process of elimination, where you begin to realize that this one life that's so dependent upon you believing that this is who you are, and then the other life, which is the life that you are not. The life, and who you are not, by the way, is who you're going to be. That's the life that you're yet to live, by the way.
That's your future.
That's your future.
Yeah. If you don't wake up.
And there's a duality in that too, because there's a part of you that is not really the person that you're supposed to be. And this part over here is the part that you haven't become yet. So it's very dimensional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. All right, my friend, and my friends, our friends listening, thank you for being with us today. Please share the show if you got some kind of contribution from the show personally, some kind of value. Share it, pass it, pay it forward. The world needs this kind of talk. Real talk. All right, David, thank you. Be well.
Bless you, brother.
Yeah, stay blessed and peace out, everyone.